Hello and welcome to Voices of BlueScope, where we meet the people who work behind the scenes at BlueScope to create strength every day. I'm your host, Martin Feld. Thank you for joining us. In today's episode, we're going to explore a lesser-known part of our Port Kembla Steelworks, the skin pass mill. Fitting into the complex manufacturing chain, the mill enhances the product's surface finish and improves its mechanical performance. We had the chance to speak with Mick Cecil, Kate McGlew, and Stephen Smith, who all work in and around the skin pass mill, albeit in very different roles. They share their own history and experience and why the facility is an important part of the steelmaking process. First of all, we meet Mick, an operator in the hot mills department in manufacturing. He explains the purpose of the skin pass mill and shares a personal story. We're sitting here with Mick in a control room at the skin pass mill. How are you today, Mick?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Can you give us a bit of context about where we are and what role this control room plays at the skin pass mill?
Yeah, so we're in HCPD, commonly known as KKA building. Coils come from the hot strip mill over to us. We then have some coils that require either going through a bypass situation where they go through, get restrapped for customers' needs, or they come through the skin pass to get reshaped, flattened for the customer's needs.
So what's important about the flattening?
So flattening is a lot of, obviously customers, the coils come over quite often with either a bit of edge wave or what we call centre buckle. And we'll get rid of that and flatten it out so that the customer can do what they need to do with it once it gets to their end.
Can you give a bit of an idea visually? Describe what are we looking at the moment? What sort of machinery is outside?
We have a mandrel at one end where the coil gets loaded onto the mandrel, pushed up through a set of rolls. As it goes through those rolls, they are set to a certain thickness, and as they go through those rolls can then be adjusted to get the correct flatness and shape, which goes back onto another mandrel at the other end, re-rolled and sent through.
What is your role here in the control room overseeing this process?
What we need to do here is monitor it as it goes through to ensure that everything's going as per schedule and as it should, without any hiccups. Got to keep an eye on the product and make sure we don't get any faults.
How long have you been working in this particular area and what brought you here?
So I've been in HCPD now for 22 years, but actually on the skin pass mill for, I'd say approximately 10 years of that.
And how's that been? What sort of things have you learnt or challenges have come up along the way?
It's very different to other parts of this department. It's a touch more complex compared to driving a ram truck or a crane. A hard job in the way of shift work. Shift work's always difficult, especially 12 hours. But it's in this department especially. It's clean. It's and it's run well. I get a lot of pleasure out of it anyway.
What's one of the greatest things that you've learned working in an industry like this?
I guess the people, the process, all of that, the logistical side of how a product comes from, a lump of dirt through to a rolled or flattened piece of steel is quite amazing, really. A lot of engineering, a lot of accomplishment seeing the product get out the door. Yeah, it's good.
Looking at the machinery here, are there particular safety considerations that you have to think about?
There's a lot of safety. Obviously, there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of pressure points. There's a lot of electrical. Safety is obviously big, and the improvements in safety around BlueScope in the last 22 years, it's huge. It's huge, and it's all for the better. When you're working with up to 30 tonne of steel, and it's getting dragged around with cranes and forklifts and ram trucks, and it has to be there. It's paramount.
Now, I noticed that you have quite an impressive beard.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, have you always sported this, or is it a recent development?
No, it's I actually have a brother-in-law who passed away of breast cancer a few years ago, and myself and another gentleman he used to work here and doesn't anymore, we decided to not cut our hair or have a shave for 12 months. And then at the end of that 12 months, obviously have it shaved and raise some money. That 12 months has now turned into 14 months because of COVID regulations, and what we're going to do and where we're going to have it. So I have 4 weeks to go, and I'm going to finally get it removed and raise some good money for a good cause.
Next, we speak with Kate, an engineering cadet. She shares her own experience working around the skin pass mill and in other departments as a part of her rotation. So we're standing here outside the skin pass mill at the Port Kembla Steelworks with Kate McGlew. How are you, Kate?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Very well. Can you give us a bit of context about who you are and what your role is here at the Port Kembla Steelworks?
I am a BlueScope cadet, and that means they move me to different departments every year. And this year, for 2020, I have been placed at HCPD, which is hot coil processing and dispatch.
What happens at hot coil processing and dispatch for the uninitiated?
We get all of the hot coils that come out of the hot strip mill, and they get sent to all different areas. Some of them will go to the skin pass mill for skin passing or recoiling. Some will go to our other processing lines, such as the slitter line or the coil plate lines, and others just get dispatched.
We can see a vehicle backing into the mill now. What is it doing?
This is what we call a tug. So what it does is it transports hot coils from this building it could be into the next building, or it could be into our processing lines. Some of them also go out to the berth, so if they're going to get exported on ships.
Can you tell us a little bit about your cadetship experience at BlueScope and what brought you here?
Before I started at the uni, I didn't even know that the cadetship program existed. It wasn't until I saw other cadets that I was like, oh, what's that? And so I joined in my 3rd year of uni, and I've loved the experience. It's great. I'm in my 3rd rotation now, and I've enjoyed every department, and the people are great as well. From my 1st to my 2nd year, that was the big shift, because I went from a lab role to an on-plant role, and it was just so different, but it was amazing, and I just had to kind of come to terms with plant is so much more different, and you just got to respect everything on plant, because things can hurt you, but so long as you have good safety, initiatives.
What are some of the safety measures that you have to be careful of in a place like this that we're looking at right now, the skin pass mill?
Definitely, as soon as you walk in the building, you look up and you check that. You got to check where the crane is, so you never want to walk under the crane if it has a load on it. You also don't want to walk past any rows that they're putting a coil into in case they roll and move. For the skin pass mill, not a lot can kind of hurt you if you're walking around it. It's just a very loud mill, so you'll definitely want to be wearing hearing protection.
Some people might be, when you say a crane, they might be thinking about the sort of crane they would see on a construction site. What's different about this crane and the setup and how it rolls in a warehouse like this?
So these cranes, they're bridge and gantry cranes. So they run on rails at the top of the building, and they travel overhead, and they can carry a lot. So our coils can weigh 20 tons or more, and yeah, it's a bit scary when you see that go over you sometimes.
What is it that you love about engineering? What is it about the field that attracted you to it?
I've always kind of wanted to do engineering. I always like knowing how things are made or why things behave in a certain way. So that kind of led me to mechanical engineering. And then after I started uni, I found that materials engineering was also really interesting. So I'm actually a materials and mechanical engineer now. Mechanical engineering is a lot of how things move and how things behave, whereas materials engineering is like how steel is made, or like polymers or rubbers, whatever kind of material you can imagine, it's how it's created or how it behaves.
What is it that you see yourself doing in the future here at BlueScope or within engineering broadly?
There's a lot of different roles I could go into. There's operations and engineering roles. They sound really, really cool and interesting. There's team leaders roles. They would also be really cool. I really like working with people, so being in more of a management role I think would be really cool. But I still know that there's a lot that I have to learn before I get to that point.
Last, we meet Stephen, a team leader in hot mills, who gives further context for the skin pass mill's role in the steelmaking process and an overview of his history with the company. Thanks so much for talking to us. Can you tell us a little bit about your role and what you do here at the Port Kembla Steelworks?
Yeah, sure. I'm the dispatch supervisor at HCPD. I look after the crew that's running on the particular shift, on A crew. Basically look after everything from the coils coming from the hot strip mill up into our building to when they're dispatched out to the customer.
The skin pass mill, from what I understand, plays a very important role in enhancing the product for customers. It's about flattening and so forth. Can you tell us a bit more about the process that surrounds the skin pass mill? What happens before and after and how it fits into the process? What's going on?
If the customer requires coils to have some extra things done to it that the hot strip mill can't provide, like the strip needs to be extra flat, or it needs a head end or tail end squared, or it's got an issue with telescope or something like that, then we can rectify that on the skin pass mill. We can also add extra straps, label it, and also if they require a test piece taken, we do that on the skin pass mill as well.
Have you always worked in this particular sort of area? Can you tell us a bit about your experience working here?
Yeah, I started with BlueScope in '93 at the foundry, and then I was there till the foundry closed in 2000, and then I came here.
Was that a big shift?
Very big shift, because I started as a cadet at the foundry and then became a metal melting supervisor there. So all my knowledge about the steelworks was based on casting, melting metal, and moulds and all that. So when I came here, I didn't really know what coils were and where they came from and how a coil was made. So it was a big learning curve. And it was funny coming here when they took me for a tour down the end where the coils come up, and they were saying, "Oh, this is the really hot section, and it's not that pleasant, and it's really hot." And I'd just come from a metal melting furnace, and I was standing here going, "If this is the hottest section of the building, it's looking a pretty good place to work."
You mentioned that you did a cadetship. That was in
metallurgy.
Can you tell us a bit about metallurgy?
It's quite a broad field. When I did the TAFE course, it involved everything from the different phases of metals and heat treatments, refractories as well was involved, and a bit of ceramics and plastics as well came under that umbrella. But yeah, everything and anything to do with metal and its properties, and we even did some welding, and so yeah, covered a lot.
The thing that sticks out to me, anywhere along the chain, anywhere along the process in the steelworks, is how interconnected and complex everything is. So even though you made that shift, did you find that having that metallurgical background gave you an edge or important knowledge or skills even when you had to move somewhere else?
Yeah, it just tapped into a different field. So when I was doing the cadetship, I was focused on foundry, which was chemical compositions of the metal, what I needed to add to the metal or get out to get the spec right for the customer and that grade, whereas here was more on the finished product, so looking at defects in strip and looking at what happened after the steel had been created as opposed to creating the steel or the iron. So yeah, it was just made me branch out to a different area of what I'd studied at TAFE. It's always different, even though it's probably seen as a production line in terms of coils come in one end and go out the other. Once you're involved in the department and the processes, there's always something different happening and some problem that you've got to get your head around and resolve. So yeah, it's not a boring production line as a lot of people would think a production line is. A lot of people see HCPD as just a warehouse or a storage area for coils, and we're a lot more than that. We've got to get the coils in to the building, and then we need to get them out. We need to have them processed, ready for the customer, and get them out within a certain time. That time frame's either because the customer wants it by a particular time, or because we just haven't got the room to store product for long periods of time. So we have to continually keep it flowing out the building, because we can go from full to empty in a very short space of time, and we can go from empty to full in a very short space of time. So we always have to be planning ahead and looking at our options for how we keep that flow going.
A lot of people would hear the word coil thrown around. What is a coil in the context of steel making? What are we seeing?
At the hot strip mill, they have a slab, and that goes through their process where they thin it down into a strip that can be anywhere from 1.82 millimetre thick up to 12 to 16 millimetres thick. And that then, because they reduce the thickness of the slab, it becomes quite long. We do up to 28, 30 tonne coil, and if you unwound that, you could end up with 1 kilometre long worth of strip. So to make that practical storage wise, you coil it up, as in wind it up into a coil, and then it becomes a round coil. It has a hole in the centre so that we can pick it up and transport it. Like I said, the heaviest we do is 28 to 30 tonne. And then on the skim pass mill, we'll uncoil it to finesse the strip, get it flatter, get it into spec, whether that's because of telescope or staggered wraps or whatever we need to do it. And then we coil it back up into what is hopefully a better looking coil, and then send it on its way to its various other processors and customers. When they come to us from the hot strip mill, they can be still up to about 400 degrees, and we store them in bays, because they can't, for us to recoil them on the skim pass mill, they have to be at about 45 degrees, can't be hotter, because that, if you recoil it over 45, that in turn puts defects in the strip. So we got to cool them down to 45 degrees. That can take 3 days, and we try and help that cooling process a bit with some big fans at the end of each bay to get fresh air blowing through, and we can get it down to 2.5 days, and then we can process it on the skim pass mill.
That concludes our episode about Port Kembla's skin pass mill. Thank you to Mick, Kate and Stephen for sharing their stories with us. To learn more about BlueScope's people and global operations, make sure to visit bluescope.com. Follow BlueScope on LinkedIn, or subscribe to @BlueScope on Twitter. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Voices of BlueScope. Stay tuned for more.